As you would know from my last video on the channel, we're watching this video from Oversimplified about the Cold War. Where we got up to was the Korean War, actually. So that's what we're starting off with today. Hope you enjoy.
After the Second World War, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. In the north, the Soviets set up a communist regime. In the south, America set up an anti-communist regime.
So we discussed why Korea was split by the 38th parallel. Basically, I the Soviets were pretty much meant to get all of Korea. Korea was part of the Japanese imperialist empire at the time, and after World War II, they pretty much decided that Berlin would be split from east to west, even though the Soviets were the ones to capture Berlin. They were split, and they believed that they were going to get parts of China, which they didn't, and the Korean Peninsula. Now, the Korean Peninsula was divided because America put in their own fascist puppet government in South Korea. And the only reason it's democratic today is because in the 80s they transformed to a more democratic, liberal democratic route. And I think the first person that was actually elected in Korea to be like the leader was like the son or the daughter of one of the monarchs. So yeah, but pretty much they put in their own sort of fascist puppet government into South Korea, and they decided to split it among 38th parallel because that was like the middle way point, like the most even point. But yeah, he talks about the Korean War later on in this, like the next couple of seconds. But basically, what happened is the guys in the north, they decided they were just going to capture it all. They came down, they nearly captured all of the Korean Peninsula. And I'm not saying that there wasn't much fighting, like much pushback, but compared to the Northern Korean soldiers and the Southern Korean soldiers, there was a significantly more in the north, and there was significantly more like pushback in the north because they were fighting for something. While in the south, a lot of people weren't willing to fight for this new government because they had just been like liberated from this Japanese fascist regime that they're under. They weren't going to fight for a new fascist regime now that they're under. So a lot of them weren't really happy with the fascists at all. Not saying that they were very happy with the communists, but some of them were like quite were. So yeah, that's pretty much how the war went. America came in with all of its allies, Australia being one of them, because obviously Australia has to, follow America. It's like a little puppy dog. And yeah, so they ended up fighting a big war with like, and then China came in because, China was allied, I guess, and it came down and it pretty much set things back to what they were. And it's quite unfortunate. 20% of Korean civil like the civilians in Korea were killed by the bombing attacks and everything. So you can see why the people of North Korea today are quite anti-West, anti-American. It's not because their leader is feeding them all this propaganda. It's because they have like it's only a generation or two below what happened in the Korean War, where they flattened every single building. In fact, bombers were just dropping bombs in the water and on random, farmland because there was no more buildings to bomb. They had killed 20% of the population. That's insane. That's 1 in 5 people that just died because America didn't want. They wanted to stop the spread of communism. And as we discussed in the last video, this whole we need to stop the spread of communism, whatever the cost, is absolutely ridiculous. They pin this whole idea of socialism and communism. Oh, it's so evil. Everyone that lives under it knows how evil it is. And yet, like everybody that's neighboring these countries that are socialist are deciding that that's what they want to do as well. These working class revolutions all around. They had to shut down the one in Greece and all this sort of stuff as well. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I'll let Oversimplified explain the Korean War.
Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Korea under their own regime. Now that he had the bomb, Stalin was feeling a little more cocky, and he finally gave Kim permission to attack. The North launched a surprise invasion of the South on June 25, 1950. With Soviet aid, the North Koreans steamrolled through, taking Seoul in just 3 days and replacing one ruthless dictator with another. The UN were freaking out and quickly created an emergency force made up of troops from 16 countries to defend the South. The West still held Busan and made landings at Incheon near Seoul. They pushed the North Koreans out of Seoul, replacing the ruthless dictator that had replaced the first ruthless dictator with the same ruthless dictator that had previously been replaced by the new ruthless dictator. And the West then continued all the way up the Korean peninsula. At this point, China was getting worried that the UN may just keep going. The US had sent this guy to lead the operation. After winning the Pacific theater of World War II, General Douglas MacArthur's head was big and his balls were bigger. He reassured President Truman that there was absolutely no way at all that the Chinese would ever get involved. Meanwhile, 500,000 Chinese troops were crossing into Korea. Nuke 'em. No. Nuke 'em. No. Ah, come on! You're fired. The US considered the nuclear option, but now that the Soviets also had the bomb, they didn't want to risk all-out global destruction. The communists pushed the West right back almost to the exact same spot they had all started from, and they ended up in a stalemate, where they remained until both sides finally agreed to work towards a peace settlement in 2018.
Wow. So they just outright admit, oh yeah, America would have absolutely nuked the whole Korean peninsula, wiped it off the map if the Soviets didn't have their own nukes. And we're meant to still think that the Americans are the goodies. Like, oh yeah, of course, like after killing 20% of the population, flattening all the buildings, you know, going into a country that isn't even willing to fight for itself. But yeah, they're the good guys because they were going to absolutely nuke that country after all the devastation and terrorism that they committed there, like absolute genocide that they committed. They're just going to nuke it. Like, oh, they would have done it, but like, oh, the Soviets had their nukes, so I mean, what can you do? It's so ridiculous. Like, if the Soviets were like if the Soviets was like, oh yeah, we would have nuked the UK, but the bad thing was that America had nukes as well, so it was a no go. Everyone would be freaking out. It'd be, oh, this big evil tyrannical empire, and it's not, because if America does it, that's fine. Of course, they would have nuked all of Korea. Of course, they would have nuked all the Chinese. That's common sense. I mean, it's ridiculous. And this whole thing about the ruthless dictators as well is just so ridiculous. They do it as well in the Vietnam War, I'm pretty sure, where they go, oh, there was two ruthless dictators, one in the north and one in the south, and it's meant to make you believe that they're impartial. And it's like, explain to me how this guy's a ruthless dictator after having his country overrun by fascists and now having a new fascist government in half his country. Is he really a ruthless dictator for wanting to, liberate his country from fascism again? I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's just so stupid.
Back in America, Americans decided they wanted a new president who would be tough on communism, so they elected famed World War II General Eisenhower, who was really hard to draw.
No, the people with the money in America decided they wanted a new guy that was tough on communism. The people of America don't really get much of a choice because this whole beacon of democracy, America number one, is really just so stupid. It is like, I think it's like 90 something percent of elections go to the lad with the most money. Nah. Yeah, it's not a real democracy.
It's 1953. Hey, Stalin, how you doing? Oh, he's dead. He had a cerebral hemorrhage, and his reign of terror kinda came back to bite him in the ass, because he had imprisoned all of his best doctors, and those that were left were too terrified to treat him.
I told you there'd be more conspiracy theories. Last video, there was a conspiracy theory about Lenin's death, and now we have the one with Stalin. And obviously, this whole thing, all the doctors, they just didn't want to save him. They were terrified of him. They were hoping he would die. Is so stupid. Like, the USSR had tons of doctors, absolutely tons. It was riddled with doctors. And apparently in this video, they say that, oh, Stalin had control of all of Eastern Europe as well. So you're telling me there was no doctors in any of the, Soviet socialist republics or in any of the Eastern European countries either, that all the doctors all across this whole map are like, nah, I'm not going to save him. And while he was alive, while he was healthy, they were like, oh yeah, that's our leader. We're all going to, we're all going to follow him and whatever he says. And then the second he gets sick, they just all went, oh wait, this guy's actually bad. We're not gonna do what this man says anymore. It's so ridiculous. It's absolutely conspiracy theories, man. But kids watch this. It's a cartoon. It's like animated and all that. Like the amount of kids that are going to turn on this video and go, "Oh wait, this is how history works." Yes, yeah, yeah. Because America are the good guys, and they were going to nuke all the Chinese people after committing genocide. And yeah, of course, that's just the way it is. And the Soviets, they're the bad guys because Stalin was actually bad. Stalin wasn't good. So yeah, that's all you need to know about history. No, there's no talk about economics. There's no talk about like politics or any of the stuff like that. These countries are how these countries run. It's just this leader in this country, and then this leader in this country, and it's so ridiculous, and it's so like Western centric as well. It's uh,
New leader, Nikita Khrushchev, called a meeting and said, "Hey guys, you know how Stalin was imprisoning and murdering us all for doing basically nothing? Yeah, he was kind of a jerk. I'm really not sure how this is news to you."
Yeah. Oh, people are surprised that Stalin was bad. Yeah, because people's lives had improved so much. I mean, Stalin turned the country, like, regardless what you think of him, the USSR was a backwards, like, semi-feudal economy that had, like, literally people, like, starving. People had, like, 12-hour working days. Regardless what you think of Stalin and how brutal he was, he did transform the USSR from, like, a really backwards, like, poor country that's just hanging off the end of Europe to, the second biggest economy in the world that was rivaling America, that had all these innovations in the space race and all this innovation in the military. They had the nukes and all this sort of stuff. They never would have had that. They never would have had such an industrialized economy. They never would have industrialized the agricultural economy. Like, there was good stuff that Stalin did, regardless how brutal and authoritarian you think that he is. And Khrushchev was a revisionist, and all the lads that followed him were revisionists, and yeah, weren't good at all. That's why the Soviet Union kind of fell. I mean, one of the reasons the Soviet Union fell was because it was run like by revisionists like Gorbachev and Khrushchev. Yeah. Oh, people are surprised that Stalin was bad. Yeah, because people's lives had improved so much. I mean, Stalin turned the country, like, regardless what you think of him, the USSR was a backwards, like, semi-feudal economy that had, like, literally people, like, starving. People had, like, 12-hour working days. Regardless what
Khrushchev went on a campaign of de-Stalinization. Statues of Stalin were taken down, Stalingrad was renamed.
Oh yes, that just reminded me when he said Stalingrad. Yeah, under Stalin, they had liberated half of Europe from Nazism and fascism. When the Nazis came in, Stalin freaked out for a bit, and what the Soviets ended up doing with the Red Army was push them back from Moscow to Berlin. I mean, seriously, it's no wonder why people actually like Stalin. Like, this whole thing is so, like, contradictory, and even if you just look tiny bit further into it, you don't even need to look at other sources or anything. If you just think critically about what this man is saying, it's like, okay, Stalin, big evil dictator. Everyone hates him. Everyone just let him die. But for some reason, everyone was following whatever he said before, and they just turned on him the second he got sick. Apparently, he was so evil, so tyrannical. Everyone was like, "Oh my god, he's so bad." And then everyone was like, "Oh yeah, like, Stalin's a good bloke. I like him. He's a good leader." And when Khrushchev came along, everyone was shocked to, like, hear him say that Stalin was bad. I mean, it's so contradictory in just what he's saying. How could someone be so bad and everyone follow everything he says? Everyone think he's a good enough bloke. This is like the people that are shocked in this animation are the people in the leadership positions. You're trying to tell me that those people are thinking like, oh, this guy was a good bloke if he was so tyrannical and evil and all sorts. It's so ridiculous, man.
And Khrushchev announced that he wanted the Soviet people to be happy and would allow greater freedom in the Soviet Union. So how did that work out? Well, an uprising in East Germany was brutally suppressed, a revolution in Hungary was brutally suppressed, and demonstrations in Poland were brutally suppressed. Although he did finally allow some mild reforms.
Yeah, so there was a lot of protests, a lot of sort of stuff like this happening at the time. And a lot of them were like color revolutions and stuff, meaning like other countries were funding these groups and all sorts of stuff like this. I don't believe they should have been suppressed or anything. I believe that just fueled the reactionary forces. But yeah, there was a lot of foreign involvement in a lot of these protests as well. And not saying that the conditions of Eastern Europe were perfect either, but I mean, come on, they were the most flattened by the war. They were taken over by the Nazis and then taken over by the Soviets that pushed the Nazis back. They had been completely destroyed by war. Depression was rampant. I mean, it's no wonder that people wanted a bit of a change, and the West was saying how great they were. Look at, we got all these sort of options in the supermarket and all this sort of crazy stuff that they didn't have in the East. But they didn't realize that in the East, they kind of had like free healthcare, education, a lot of the stuff. And after the fall of the Eastern Bloc nations and after the fall of the USSR, a lot of like polls have been taken where significant portions of the population say that they want to, they had a better life under communist rule, and that they had a better living conditions, better working conditions, so on. The people that said that they wanted a multi-party democracy and a capitalist economy, like a market economy. There's less and less people like that every year in these countries. Every poll that they take, it's less people that said, "Hey, like this is better systems." So yeah, I mean, I don't think they should have brutally suppressed anything, but I also think that there was foreign involvement, because obviously there was foreign involvement in these, like there is still today. I mean, look at all the protests, like the what are they called? The Arab Spring and all that, that they was just trying to take down all these Arab nations. So they funded all these reactionary rebel groups in like Libya and stuff. And that's why it's so stupid when I hear people going, "Oh, North Korea are evil because they have nukes." And it's like, bro, if North Korea didn't have nukes, you don't think America would just charge in there straight away and take it? They, like, one of the lads in America said he was going to follow the Libya model or something. I read this. He was like, "Oh, we would take the Libya model with Iran, with North Korea, sorry." And basically, what the Libya model is get them to give all their weapons, like stop making nukes, all this sort of stuff. And then once they've given up all their nukes, all their weapons, all this sort of stuff, we just charge in. And that's what they did with Libya when Libya started, scaling down their military and all this to develop closer ties with the West. The West decided, hey, this is our time to pounce. They funded these color revolutions in the Arab Spring, and that's why I'm, bringing this up, is because these color revolutions in Eastern Europe were quite similar.
Young people began enjoying abhorrent Western pop culture. Son, remove that disgusting imperialist apparel at once. Shut up, Dad. You can't tell me what to do. Well, would you look at that? Turns out he can tell me what to do.
Oh, wait, I just noticed they have John Lennon on the carpet. And as I pointed out in my last video, John Lennon was like investigated by the FBI, CIA, all that sort of like American intelligence, because they thought he was a communist. He outright said, "I'm a communist. I prefer like a stateless society," and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, I mean, they have John Lennon on the carpet there. It's like Western culture. I mean, he was kind of against all the sort of Vietnam War and everything as well. So I don't know, just interesting to point that out.
But members of the Manhattan Project aided the Soviet Union in acquiring the bomb. Some American officials believed they were on the wrong side. I'll sell you 3 secrets for $5 million. Okay, go ahead. The Allies are digging a tunnel under East Berlin to tap your communications. There's an American agent living at this address in Moscow. And sometimes, when I'm home alone, I like to put on my wife's dresses, sit in the corner, and cry for hours.
These guys are pinned as, oh, they're evil traitors. I mean, they gave the USSR bombs. They gave them like the information to get the nuclear bombs. And it's like, yeah, they didn't want a country with to have like, global supremacy and like a global monopoly on nuclear weapons. That's why the lads in the Manhattan Project, because they thought the Nazis were going to get nukes. So they decided to aid America in getting nukes. So it's a whole situation there where they decided not to, because it turned out they found out that, hey, these Nazis don't even have nukes anymore. So yeah, they decided they didn't want to do it. They were kind of forced to doing it, and it's no wonder that they wanted to give the Soviets nukes so that America wouldn't have a global monopoly. It's pinned as, oh, these guys are so evil, but I mean, it was a kind of good thing to do, regardless what you think, unless you're like one of those that's like, oh, America's number one, regardless what they do. All the genocide, that's all fine. That's America. We're number one. Yeah, all this sort of stuff. It's like, it's probably a good thing that one country doesn't have a the power of nuclear weapons while every other country doesn't. I mean,
Fear took hold during the Red Scare and the McCarthy trials. American values imploded as fear of communism collided with freedom of thought and expression, and communist kind of became a buzzword thrown around to describe anything people didn't like. Hollywood? Communist. Your next door neighbor's dog? Communist. When the grocery store cashier asks if you need a bag when you clearly can't carry 10 tubs of baconaise in your hands? Communist.
okay, yeah. So they talk about the Red Scare as if it's nothing. They just throw around the word communist for a bit. It's a bit of a period. Like they red listed everyone. They red listed them as in they'd find their like documents and everything, and they like tell the employers and everything that these guys are potential communists or outright communists. And a lot of these people just couldn't get work because the employer would know, hey, these lads are communists, which is yeah, so ridiculous. I mean, the amount of people that probably had their lives ruined by this, and they bowl over it like everything. Oh, it's just a little thing, just like they did with the Greek Civil War and everything. It's just a little thing. Don't worry about it. Move on, because they don't want to actually talk about all the bad stuff that America did. Because if they did talk about all the bad stuff that America did, this video would be twice as long, and it wouldn't really work as Western propaganda, anti-communist propaganda as much.
Much to America's concern, the Soviet Union appeared to be ahead in the space race. Everyone freaked out when Russia launched the world's first satellite, and then they actually sent a man into space. Even worse, there also appeared to be a missile gap in the Soviets' favor, and Khrushchev was so confident that he even allowed the US to set up a technology exhibit in Moscow, attended by a certain Vice President Richard Nixon. Check this out, we have color TV. Yes, but we've been to space and can obliterate you with our massive nuclear arsenal.
Yes, the Soviet Union sent the first man to space, and they also sent a dog and a monkey to space as well. I mean, they were the first to put up the the satellite Sputnik. I've made a video called Innovation, Socialism versus Capitalism, where I talk about all the innovations made by the Soviet Union. And it's crazy how people go, oh, socialism just doesn't innovate because there's no market competition. And it's like, bro, have you ever heard of the space race, man? Have you ever heard the arms race where both were getting all these nuclear weapons? Don't you think these wouldn't have existed if socialism just didn't innovate? But yeah, I mean, obviously the USSR beat America to the punch on a lot of things until what's his name came along in the 60s, I believe. Yeah, in the 60s, this president came along. For the life of me, can't remember his name. JFK, I think. Yeah, John F. Kennedy. And he said, by the end of this decade, we will send a man to the moon. And all the scientists like, nah, man, we can't do that. They ended up getting some Nazi scientists over from, good old Germany, and they ended up getting the job done. And yeah, I mean, proof that capitalism can innovate. You just need some, Nazis, and you're right. You can beat those socialists. It's a bit ridiculous, but yeah, it is what it is.
In 1960, Americans decided they wanted a new president who would be tough on communism, so they elected John F. Kennedy.
About earlier, John F. Kennedy. Yeah, he said that he was going to send a man to the moon by the end of the decade. And he also kind of nearly ended the world with the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm not sure if they'll talk about that in this episode, actually.
The Soviet Union was advancing its technology, but it was also bleeding its coffers dry, and all of the money was going towards the military, not the people. Life under communism was still as hard as ever, and Berlin remained a thorn in the Soviet side. The contrast between the economically prosperous West and the struggling East was clearer day by day, and East Berliners were still able to freely travel to the West. Now, many of them were deciding to stay there.
America had the whole Marshall Plan where they pumped all this money into Western European countries to build them up, to pretty much make, people in the East think that their lives are so much worse because obviously when your country isn't that rich, your life is like that much worse. And that's not accelerationism, keeping a Cuban missile, the Cuban embargo where people aren't even allowed to trade with Cuba and Venezuela and Vietnam and North Korea and all this, pretty much for the intention of, if conditions get so much worse, people revolt against their socialist governments. And that's just that. That's normal. That's just how it works. That's not accelerationism. But when Stalin and Lenin point out that, hey, conditions get bad under capitalism, and that's why people revolt, they're considered accelerationists because yeah, they do want people to revolt. So yeah, I think it's a bit hypocritical, just like all propaganda is. But yeah, it's obvious. Like the Western European countries were much richer, they were much less affected by the war, and yeah, they had all the money pumped into them. I mean,
Millions defected to West Germany via West Berlin, causing Eastern factories to lose workers and taking a heavy toll on the economy. Soviet leaders decided this couldn't continue any longer. First, Khrushchev tried this: leave West Berlin, or else. Or else what? Or else, I'll be really mad at you. Yeah, no, we're gonna stay. Listen, man, West Berlin is ours, East Berlin is yours. That's just how it is. Kennedy felt pretty good about his show of American resolve. But wait a second, did you catch that? Let's replay it.
East Berlin is yours.
Uh-oh, Kennedy just told Khrushchev that the USA wouldn't interfere in what the Soviets did with their section of Berlin, so Khrushchev came up with a new idea. We're gonna build a wall, and it's gonna be a big, beautiful wall, and it's gonna keep out all the Mexicans. No, sir, that's wrong. It's gonna keep in these Berliners. Oh, sorry, it's gonna keep in all the Mexicans.
yeah, the part of the reason why the Berlin Wall was constructed was to also that he talked about spies earlier. It was kind of to stop people from going into one nation, spying on all of Eastern Europe, spying on Soviet Union, and then just walking across in your West Berlin, and you're in the country that you're spying for. But yeah, the Berlin Wall was constructed, and this whole idea that it tore families apart, I think is a bit stupid, because that means that every border tears like families apart. Like extended families might have been on the other side of the border, but your mom and dad weren't. I mean, people still lived in their households with their like families, so people still lived in the households with their families. So it's a yeah. I mean, by this logic, every border is tearing families apart. But yeah, the Berlin Wall ended up falling later. So yeah.
On August 13th, 1961, Berliners woke up to find their city divided into two, with barbed wire and guards blocking the border between East and West. Over time, a wall was constructed throughout the city.
Yeah, so pretty much the whole idea of the Berlin Wall originally, which is why they had barbed wire, is because they thought it would be temporary, and it wasn't. They gave West Berlin to the West because they thought that, hey, this would be temporary because, unity, solidarity, even though the Soviets had, gotten to Berlin first, they agreed to give half of it to Western countries because they thought that not only would this, improve relations, but this would also mean that they would get Korea, which obviously America wasn't happy with. They took off Korea, half of Korea. Yeah, so, I mean, is what it is.
Families were torn apart. Thousands would risk their lives escaping over the wall, and hundreds would die trying. To the despair of Berliners, the West were unable to do anything about it. But the wall did put on full display the failure of the communist system. As Kennedy said, democracy is not perfect, but we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in.
Yeah, the wall showed the failures of communism, not the fact that these countries were completely devastated and that their economies were being destroyed, because obviously when you don't have workers, you don't have an economy. But yeah, this showed the failures of the communist system. 100%. Yes, you're right. Yeah. But thousands of people homeless, thousands of people starving, hundreds of millions of people food insecure every year when we have a surplus of food, when we throw out 40% of our food. Now, that doesn't show the failures of capitalism. A wall shows the failures of communism.
As part of the agreement between the two sides, US diplomats were still allowed to travel to East Berlin. But suddenly, East Berlin crossing guards started giving them the business. And Kennedy was like, nah-uh. In October, the US rolled tanks up to the crossing point at Checkpoint Charlie as a show of strength. The Soviets did the same, and the two were in a standoff. They stayed like that for 16 hours, and the world braced for nuclear Armageddon. Thankfully, though, Kennedy called Khrushchev directly and was like, hey man, this is getting way too hot. How about you back your tanks up by an inch and we'll do the same? Sounds good. Okay, how about you back your tanks up by another inch and we'll follow suit? Alright, hey, you want to do another inch? And they both very slowly inched away from the apocalypse. Phew, let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my presidency. It wasn't.
So, I presume they're talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis with that last comment. And that's probably where we'll start the next video off with. I hope you enjoy this video, And yeah, I hope you might have learned something. And yeah, like and subscribe, all that sort of stuff.